Are the United States and Iran headed to war? Or are they headed to a diplomatic off-ramp? Right now, we simply don't know. There are mixed signals coming out of the White House. There are mixed signals coming out from a lot of the leading voices in the United States on some of the media channels, and it's just unclear. There does seem to be a certain constituency in the United States that actually wants this war to happen, and there's another constituency that seems to want to avoid it. Good on the second group there, but we need to make sure that they actually are preeminent, because I fear, and lots of evidence will support this, there's on the one side that seem to want to have a military solution don't understand the nature of war. They seem to have a surface level understanding of what has happened over the last 2 decades in the United States when it comes to the use of military force, especially in the Middle East. They don't seem to have been paying much attention at all to what's coming out of Iran or what the capabilities are, any of those kinds of things. If they had been watching some of our shows, they might have a better understanding of the missile capacity for Iran, when we've had MIT professor Ted Postel come on to explain quite a bit of the capabilities and the limitations for the Iranian side. But here's the big issue. Why do we even need to be talking about the possibility for war? Now, the casus belli for all of this, according to President Trump, who he reiterated again yesterday, is because Iran can't have a nuclear weapon.
Iran wants to deal with us, but they don't know how. They really don't know how. We had a meeting with them on Saturday. We have another meeting scheduled next Saturday. I said, that's a long time. You know, that's a long time. So I think that might be tapping us along. But Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. He can't have a nuclear weapon. Nobody can have. We can't have anybody having nuclear weapons, you know? We can't have nuclear weapons.
And listen, one of the things he also wanted to say is, he mentioned actually in that clip there, but maybe they're just tapping us out, which in the lingo there means maybe they're just drawing out these negotiations because they don't want to have the deal, but they just want to endlessly talk or so. He implies there, and actually he's said several other places, well, you may recall actually several weeks ago, he flat out said, if there's no negotiations, there will be bombing. So that was pretty explicit. And we again have to ask the question, why? What is the point here? Now, just a bit of background so that you understand the context of all these comments that we're going to show today in the current situation is in 2015, so 10 years ago, President Obama, after about a 2-year period, had negotiated it's called the JCPOA, Joint Contact Plan. JCPOA, Joint Plan of Action is what it was. Basically, the Iran nuclear deal, where the Iranians would not have very much nuclear capacity. They would be limited in how much nuclear material they could have. They would have international inspectors at all of their declared sites to find out what they were doing and what they weren't, which is you can't hide from those kinds of detectors that are on site. They couldn't reprocess a certain amount. They could only have a certain amount of centrifuges. What they did have could only reprocess up to a certain level, and then that was it. And for almost 3 years, those constraints were put into place on the Iranian side. They got some limited sanctions relief from the Obama administration, limited with a bunch of snapback provisions in the case that they violated this or that. And in exchange, the Iranians said that they would keep this at a nuclear power level, at a research level. And of course, nobody took anybody's word for anything. They had inspectors on site. Well, this immediately ran afoul from the Republicans in the Congress, because number one, they just didn't like anything that had the word Obama on it. So if Obama negotiated this, it must be bad. And so they found all these problems with it. And to be clear and fair, there were some holes in the agreement. The inspectors were only on the declared sites, and there were other places where they couldn't go, leading many to say, well, they may have a secret nuclear weapons program somewhere else, and you wouldn't know it. It's not as easy as that, because there are some measuring devices that the IAEA has, which can detect even in the country, even if they're not in a declared site, but it's not foolproof. So there were some holes in it. but it was very, very effective on the front. It was very constrained on the Iranian side. It was very intrusive to them. There was a lot of angst within the Iranian regime, within their own government. The many didn't want to do it because they didn't think they could trust the West. Others said, yeah, we've got to do this so we can get the sanctions relieved and then we can start doing more business, etc. Those sides finally ended up winning. And then in the years that passed, the Iranian leader who negotiated that with Obama took a lot of heat because he said they were promised all kinds of things from the West that they didn't get, but they did give a lot of stuff. So there was a lot of anxiety, but they still largely held it until May of 2018, when President Trump declared that he was pulling out of the deal. He said it was a bad deal. He was going to negotiate a better deal because he said then the same thing he's saying now: Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. Iran wasn't making a nuclear weapon. The last time there was any evidence that they were even doing research was 2003. Since 2003, the CIA, the MI6, Mossad, all of them have been saying there's no evidence that Iran has made a decision to have a nuclear weapons program. Since we got out in 2018, with a lot of the constraints now pulled off unilaterally by us, now Iran has been reprocessing at greater percentages. They have been stockpiling more processed facilities. And now then, even though as recently as a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said still there's no evidence that Iran has made a decision to have a nuclear weapons program. They do at the same time, though, say that the breakout period has shrunk. And it continues because of the capacity. They have more centrifuges. They're reprocessing to a higher percentage, which is just a few grades below weapons grade, which would be needed. And according to most public accounts, if Iran wanted to have a nuclear weapons program, they could get one in a matter of weeks now, just a few weeks. They could just change a few things, and all of a sudden they could have enough fissile material for a couple of bombs within a month or two, and then they could actually have them weaponized within another month or two after that. So maybe 2 or 3 months max, they could have a deliverable nuclear weapon. That's possible. But will they? The question is, have they shown any evidence that they're moving in that direction? And the answer is no. But the more we put pressure on them, the more we threaten Iran, the more we put them in a position that they may calculate one day that that's their only alternative to defend themselves from the United States or from the United States and Israel. And we've shown you, I think it was a week or so ago, maybe 10 days, Ari Larijana, former foreign minister for Iran, made that very statement in public. If you push us far enough, we may be forced to go back on the fatwa that we had since 2003 of no nuclear weapons. It's the only thing we may be able to do to protect ourselves. So the logic and the rational thing would be, don't put Iran in a position to where it feels its back is against the corner and its only recourse is to have a nuclear weapon. Once that happens, then the nuclear genie is out of the bottle and you can't put it back in there. And now everything is going to change after that. And I can't even predict it, but I can't imagine that it would be anything but worse than what we have now. So the logic thing to do would be, don't find out. Don't put Iran in a position to where the only thing it can do is to have a nuclear weapons program. Instead, we need to have diplomacy. And that's what Trump is saying he's wanting to do here. But it's got to be actual diplomacy, genuine diplomacy, to where you have to give something to get something. And so far, all I've heard about is what we're going to take from Iran and what they're going to give to us. But I haven't heard anything yet about what we're going to give to Iran. And listen, folks, listen to me carefully, especially all you hawks out there. If President Trump is not willing to give Iran something, he's not going to get what he wants. This idea that you can just pressure them enough and maximum pressure and threaten to destroy them and all that's going to make them unilaterally give up everything that you're asking for, that's a fantasy. And we've seen it backfire so many times. Only rarely does it ever work. And even then, it's temporary and not completely. We don't need to get into a situation where we have to find out where that line is, because there are ways that can do this, as was proved in the 2015 negotiations that led to the JCPOA in the first place. The Obama administration did give some things, and they got some things in return, some big things. President Trump got out of this deal in 2018 with the promise he was negotiate a better deal. 4 years in office, no better deal was ever materialized. In fact, they never even got off to start. They never even got into any talk in because we weren't even willing to entertain the possibility of giving anything. Now, whether they are this time or not is unknown, because so far they haven't been talking very much about what's going on behind the scenes. There was a negotiating session last week on Saturday, and apparently there's another one scheduled for this coming Saturday. So we'll see how that works out here. But when you look at some of the folks that are around in the information sphere in the United States, there seems to be more of a lust for war than there does any interest in diplomacy. And we show him all the time because he's kind of symptomatic of the really the right in the United States, or maybe even not the right so much, because many on the left hold the same view, is this neocon view voiced by General Jack Keane.
President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have all the cards here. Iran is relatively defenseless against an attack. They know it. They haven't retaliated against Israel since the October attack, which was devastating on them. They removed their defenses and much of their rockets and missiles. We've got maximum sanctions hanging over their head here. Their economy is in the tank. If they don't want to dismantle their program and get sanction relief and be welcomed in as a legitimate country, if they're going to stop their malign behavior in the region, then we execute the ultimatum that President Trump has laid down in front of them.
Okay, couple of problems here. Number one, he did use the same. If they don't want sanctions relief, if they don't want to basically join the community of nations, which is the phrase we used to use with North Korea, listen, you're not actually offering that. Can you imagine that President Trump is going to come out of the next negotiating session on Saturday and say, well, all right, Iran has agreed they're not going to have a nuclear weapons program. And they're going to, I think Steve Witkoff said last night on Fox News that they would reprocess no more than 3.67%, if I'm not mistaken. So that means they're going to maintain something. That sounded an awful lot like the constrictions of the JCPOA, which we got rid of. Even to get down to that, Trump is going to simultaneously have to announce what we are giving to Iran. So he's going to have to say we're removing X and Y sanctions and whatever down to certain levels or something. People in the United States their heads are going to blow up. They don't actually want to give Iran anything. They're actually hoping that this ultimatum that Trump has given, and by the way, I think it was the 19th of March, he said this: either you accomplish all of these things or there will be bombing. That's the time he said that. So that puts the clock, he said, about 2 months. So that's somewhere around the 19th of May. So let's see. So that's a little more than a month away. So a lot of people are wanting that short timeline to run run the clock out so that they can be bombing. And listen, that you can understand why some of them are pretty excited, because on the 7th of March, before that was officially stated, Trump was really aggressive on the 7th of March when he said this in the Oval Office.
You know, we're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon. It's an interesting time in the history of the world. But we have a situation with Iran that something's going to happen very soon. Very, very soon. You'll be talking about that pretty soon, I guess. And hopefully we can have a peace deal. You know, I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other. But the other will solve the problem.
Yeah. Will it, though? Will the other solve the problem? See, that's kind of the same thing that Jack Keane's thinking. He said, we can go in, we can do it the hard way, or we can do it the easy way, basically is what he's saying there. He also said, Keane did there right before that we either get it done the easy way or we'll execute the ultimatum that the president said. Okay, hang on just a second. Okay, if you are an American and if you believe that the country is governed by the rule of law, or that it ought to be governed by the rule of law, then there's kind of an important step that has to be met in there, and that is to get authorization to do this. The president of the United States categorically does not have the authority to make good on Jack Keane's threat of an ultimatum, or the one that the president himself listed, or executed, as General Keane there suggested. You can't just do that if you're going to be governed by the rule of law. You have to have either a declaration of war by the Congress or a congressional authorization before the fact, unless Iran does something crazy and attacks an American military somewhere, or U.S. directly, etc. Those are the only three conditions under which the U.S. law will allow the president of the United States to take action. That's it. Congressional declaration of war, congressional authorization, or we were attacked. And if none of those things exist, he cannot do it, or he will be violating the law. It's categorical. It's as black and white as it can be, intentionally so. That's why they drafted the law. The Constitution itself was very clear. Only Congress has the ability to declare war. But in 1973, because of violations by the presidents at that time, especially Nixon, they wanted to be more specific and designate those three things. So absent those three things, he can't. Now, obviously, almost no one's paid attention to that. But then we run into the risk that we aren't a nation governed by the rule of law. And I know that if you're for this, you're thinking, that's archaic anyway. Okay, that's fine if you want to say that. But then that means that the rule of law continues to get whittled down. And what happens on the day when you do something afoul of another administration? Now then we've whittled down the rule of law and they can do whatever they want. Or another administration takes us into a different war that you don't like, and they don't see congressional action, and it does backfire. It does blow up in our face. Then you won't be very excited about it. But the problem is, because of the standard that we have set here, you can't say anything. You will be silent, or you'll be exposed as a fraud and somebody who is just a grotesque double standard. And no one will take you seriously. I most assuredly will not. And I'm not the only one. The only way you can get by and do anything that makes sense and is safe for America is to restrain yourself to be governed by the rule of law. There's a reason why those laws are there. It's supposed to be hard to go to war. It's not supposed to be easy. We're not supposed to be a country that has a monarch that can just unilaterally take the country to war if he personally feels like it. There is a danger. Don't go down that path. Because not only could this blow up in our face, but it could lead to other bad places as well. Because when someone gets that much power and they can literally just take life and death choices for other people with no constraints, there's other things that they'll do. And the more the restraints come off, the more the free willing comes in. And I promise you, folks, it won't be good for us. It won't be good for us. And many of the people who are cheering this on loudly today may be victims of it tomorrow, whether it's Trump is doing something that you don't like, or some next president comes in and is going down another path you don't like that is opposite of what you may say. And now all of a sudden, because of we've loosened the bonds, now all of a sudden you're going to be at risk. Let's don't find out. Let's continue to be governed by the rule of law. But there are others who also, not just about the rule of law, who don't seem to understand how combat works and have such a casual understanding of the second and third order effects that happen when you use lethal military effects, such as Rebecca Heinrichs on Fox News.
The Trump administration has made clear that if this were to happen, the Israelis would certainly take the lead. But the Israelis are going to need some support, military support from the United States. Those B-2 bombers carry ordnances that are able to destroy deeply buried, hardened targets inside Iran. That's where the nuclear facilities are. That's where all the infrastructure is. And so the B-2 bombers may play a role in destroying some of these deeply buried, hardened targets. Remember, the reason the Trump administration withdrew from the Obama-Iran deal is because that Iran deal left all of that infrastructure in place. It didn't require the Iranians to dismantle its program. And so as soon as those sanctions were relieved on the Iranians, they just went right back to developing the program and enriching.
Okay, before I get onto the substance of that, either she's lying or she is grossly unaware of the facts. Because in the last segment of that comment right there, she just said that we got out of the JCPOA because of they weren't applying things, and that as soon as the sanctions were relieved, then they started reprocessing. Flat out inaccurate. That is not what happened. To the contrary, when the sanctions were relieved, when Obama put the deal into effect, they stopped reprocessing. They actually complied with the terms of the deal. So don't be trying to rewrite history and to cast the Iranians into somebody who can't be trusted on anything. And because the implication being, well, it didn't work in the first time, so it won't work now. That's not what happened. In fact, it was a long time after Trump got out of the JCPO before they started reprocessing stuff. And then even then, they did it at lower levels, saying that if you'll get back into the deal, America, We'll go back to the original strictures. And it was some number of years before they finally just started saying, all right, we're going to keep going up more and more because you're not giving us anything. If you talk about somebody who can't be trusted, how can you say anything? If you're being honest, then it's the United States that can't be trusted here. We, as the president of the United States, forget about the name of the man, but the president of the United States committed our country to a deal with another country that says, if you do this, we'll do this. And if you don't do that, we won't do this. And then the next guy that comes into the office all of a sudden just tears it all up. So all the work that had been done, everything that had been agreed to, thrown in the garbage. So they, for a long time, actually complied with the terms of that deal. To this day, they're still complying with some of the terms of the deal, even though we're not. All the benefits that we were supposed to grant them, we didn't produce them after Trump came into office, and certainly after May 2018. So you talk about that somebody that can't be trusted, it's the United States. And I assure you that is not lost on the Iranian side. But on the American side, and let's just add Senator Tom Cotton to this. It's not just commentators or former generals, but Tom Cotton himself. This is a tweeted or X post earlier today. He said President Trump recognizes that Iran tries to drag out negotiations while racing towards a nuclear weapon and developing missiles that can reach as far as the United States, clearly implying that, yep, it's time to go. It's time to use military power. You heard Rebecca Heinrichs talking about the B-2s that are at Diego Garcia now. We've put a couple of aircraft carrier groups. I mean, for all the world, it looks like we are getting ready for military action. But let me explain a few things to the senator and to Ms. Heinrichs. That's not how it's going to work. Now, you have been lulled to sleep by seeing what happened when, let's see, I think it was, I want to say it was Obama, Trump, and Biden, all three at one point or another fired missiles into Syria for one violation or another. And Bashar al-Assad was too weak to do anything about it, and nothing ever happened between it. The United States assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the general of the IRGC in 2020. And other than firing a few missiles back that didn't actually kill anybody in the United States, in the U.S. forces in Iraq, that was the end of it there. You've had Israel destroy an Iranian embassy in Syria, and basically nothing was done about that. You had an assassination in the capital city of Tehran during a presidential inauguration, and even though they fired back a small number of missiles, they always restrained their response to make sure it didn't escalate because they don't want to get into a bigger war. Now, you heard Doug McGregor on our show earlier today. He said that that's not an example of Iranian weakness. It's just an example of Iranian restraint. I think maybe it's a combination of both, because they don't want to get into a big war with the United States or Iran or Israel because they know they can't defeat them. So they don't want to get one that started. So they're really restraining themselves. But if you get into a situation to where you are threatening an existential strike, not just a painful military strike here and taking out a few rocket launchers there, knocking out some air defense sites, etc., or an assassination, a one-off kind of deal, but if you actually try to destroy their nuclear facilities, to try to take out their missiles, etc., then there is the distinct possibility that we find out how strong Iran actually is, and that now then, once you've taken off from them the possibility that it's just a painful strike, but it's something bigger, and it could be an existential threat, because there are many, over the last couple of months, people in the United States are advocating, and Israel for that matter, are advocating a decapitation strike. They want to destroy the Iranian regime. Now, if you are the leader of the Iranian regime or any of the senior leaders, and you know that another side is literally trying to kill you all, and you have this arsenal, you would be a fool not to use it. Why do we want to find out about that? I mean, that's the problem back and forth. And yet this morning there was a meeting actually in the Pentagon of the National Security Council that I think Trump was personally involved with, where they're talking about this stuff. That's this morning. And that's in light of yesterday, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth was on Maria on Fox Business News, who laid out where his mind is.
he's dead serious that he wants it done at the negotiating table. He wants it done peacefully. And that's why he's going straight to these talks. He set that deadline. These were productive talks yesterday. I don't want to get ahead of our skis. Steve Witkoff does a fantastic job, but it was a good step, and they're going to go at it again on Saturday. But he's also dead serious that if we can't figure this out at the negotiating table, then there are other options, to include my department, to ensure that Iran never has a nuclear bomb. We hope we never get there. We really do, Maria. But what we're doing with the Houthis and what we're doing in the region, we've shown a capability to go far, to go deep, and to go big. And again, we don't want to do that. But if we have to, we will, to prevent the nuclear bomb in Iran's hands.
Go far, go deep, and all that, big talk. Listen, if people who are watching the news in America who are already for this stuff are going to cheer that on and say, yeah, that's right. We'll show them. We show what we can do with the Houthis, and we'll come after you if you don't. The Houthis aren't Iran. Okay. And by the way, we've been trying to either directly or indirectly or in a supporting role, trying to destroy the Houthis since 2015. So for a full 10 years, along with both Saudi Arabia at different times and Israel at different times, we've been trying to knock the Houthis out. We have failed. To this day, they're still a viable entity. We keep blowing stuff up and we keep killing a lot of people in Yemen, but they haven't been cowed. They continue to strike periodically. So that's not a good example you want to use if you want to try to say what you can do with Iran, which is much bigger. The Houthis are a proxy force of Iran, but the Iran themselves are the strongest of all of them, and their capabilities are substantial in many cases. They have fast patrol boats. They have the ability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz if they want. They have a very powerful missile force, which they have demonstrated on more than one occasion is very accurate, can penetrate air defenses both in Saudi Arabia and in Israel. And they have restrained themselves for using it so far. But they have specifically said, if it comes to war, that all the restraints will be pulled off, and they specifically included American forces that are scattered throughout the Middle East, especially in Iraq and in Syria. They're very vulnerable because they don't have good theater defensive networks and air defense systems. They have tactical stuff, but many of the ballistic missiles and some of the hypersonics or cruise or all the different things that the Iranians have, most of those, especially the higher end ones, our forces don't have defense against. And if they wanted to kill large numbers of Americans, they can do it. If they wanted to actually cause real problems to Israel, they proved, especially in the last iteration, that they can penetrate that with the right kind of missiles. They can do it. They chose not to then. But anybody who thinks that this is going to be like Syria and that we're going to fire a few missiles, or it's going to be like the Houthis where we fire a bunch of missiles and blow up a bunch of stuff and then they kind of go into a shell for a while, that's not how Iran would work especially if they think you're going after them. And if you're not successful, whether it's these B-2s, whether it's the U.S. Air Force, the Israeli Air Force, our long-range missiles, etc., the chances of that actually knocking out the Iranian capacity on all their locations to actually have a nuclear weapon, you're rolling the dice. Because they're aware of the capabilities. They know about our bunker buses. We talk about it all the time as we've been developing it and as we boast about it like we did here on TV, signaling to Iran for years now, you better dig something very deep inside of a mountain. And these B-2s, these bunker busters, they're not magic. They're effective. They're not magic. They can't get everything. Number one, you don't know where to target. You have some idea. Obviously, we've got a pretty good targeting capacity, but it's not foolproof. And even some of the places we know about, if you go in and using these weapon systems, they may not succeed. They may not be able to get that far down. Then you're in a position to where now then there are no more restraints on the Iranian side. The only thing that they will do is race to a bomb. The very thing you claim to want to prevent, you have now given them every reason in the world to go get it. Maybe you will succeed enough to at least destroy enough of the elements of their nuclear program, maybe that they won't be able to do it. Maybe there's some part that they really need that was destroyed, for example, in a situation like this. But that's also hope that you can't validate because you can't prove that you can do it. And if we get into a long-range war, aside from the nuclear component, let's say that we get lucky and they weren't able to race to a bomb because we got something blown up. But now then it's just a conventional war. Well, the Houthis were able to fight for all this period, like I said, for 10 years so far, on and off. And what if we get into a situation where the Iranians don't do like Bashar al-Assad and go into a shell and say, okay, I'm sorry, we quit. But they just say, okay, it's war then, and here we go. And then they get into a sustained war, and they start attacking our shipping. They start attacking our bases in the area, other economic assets. They close off the Strait of Hormuz. What are you going to do then? Are you going to send in a ground force? We don't have one. We are on flat-footed. There's no way. This is not like Desert Storm, where we had an army, a field army of 750,000 when Saddam Hussein invaded in 2016. We now have I think it's like 450 total in the whole world of the ground forces of our U.S. Army. And I promise you, they are not ready for combat right now. It would take months to get ready. And that's not enough anyway. As a means of reference, in the Desert Storm, there were 500,000 on the ground, war fighters primarily of the coalition that we had here. And now you would have to have 50,000 more than that of the entirety of our armed forces. And if you don't understand how armies are made up of it, only a small percentage, about 20% of that is actual war fighters. Everything else is support. So you would have to have hundreds of thousands of more soldiers if you wanted to invade. And if you don't, then guess what? All you've got now is a missile war. Iran can have a missile war. They can continue to fight. We don't have the resources because we have given so much stuff to Ukraine since 2022, and we've given now even more stuff to Israel since 2023, and apparently there's no stopping any of that stuff. And we have been ourselves expending a lot in the Red Sea with these attacks on the Houthis. I'm telling you right now, we don't have the inventories to have a sustained war with Iran. And we don't have the defense industrial base to start producing enough. It would take literally years, multiple years, to get things ginned up to a position to where we could sustain that. But what happens in that delta between now and years? What will you do? See, there's too few people that want to think this stuff through. You've got to be able to say, all right, if things go bad, if the worst outcome happens, I've got to be able to afford it. I've got to be able to facilitate and actually still come out on top if it goes bad. You've got to look at the range of possibilities. Here's the best case, that you launch a few missiles and they go to ground. Cool. That would be the best case, taking the morality out of it. But then if it doesn't go the best case, what if they race to a bomb? Then what? And if they don't get that, but then they just say, all right, it's a sustained war. Can we fight that? The answer here is no. And the answer here is hell no. Because now then we have, by our actions, brought this genie out of the bottle. And I promise you, whatever you think of Iran today, it will be far worse if they actually have a deliverable nuclear weapon. We know that Israel has. I think it was former President Jimmy Carter, some number of years after he left office, publicly admitted that Israel had at that time 200 weapons. Doug McGregor earlier today said he thought it was now 300. I don't know what the number is. I don't have any idea, although I take both of them at their word that there are some. And now then Israel may say, now we're free to use it. Well, once you've got the nuclear genie out of the bottle, and especially if there's been an exchange, dynamics around the world are changed forever, because now nobody's going to want to trust the United States, and nobody's going to want to trust their security to somebody else, so they will want to get their own bomb to have their own deterrent or so. And there's lots of states that say they want it, but they're restrained right now because of our assurances and our nuclear umbrella. Don't find out where this could go. Listen to me. Listen. There are so many ways this goes wrong and almost no ways it goes better. Even in the so-called best case scenario here, where you launch some missiles and they go to ground, at most you have delayed a nuclear weapons program. Now you've convinced them that that's the only thing they can do, and they'll try to nefariously do it without letting anybody know over time. And the only way you find out may be a nuclear test, 3-4 years from now. That's the best case scenario. And it is a worse condition for us then than it is now. So the best case scenario, don't use any weapons. Do not go to war. Do not try to solve this with military power, because you don't need to. The Iranian side has said openly, their foreign minister published something in the Washington Post a week ago that said, hey, we want to solve this diplomatically. We want to reduce these tensions. We're willing to talk. We're willing to negotiate. But as he said, Gary, if you can toss that up on the screen there, he said, for its part, the United States can show that it is serious about diplomacy by showing that it will stick to any deal it makes. If we are shown respect, we will reciprocate. military buildups send the exact opposite signal. Mark my words, Iran prefers diplomacy, but it knows how to defend itself. We have not yielded to threats in the past, and we will not do so now or in the future. We seek peace, but we will never accept submission. Any country would have said the same kind of thing. And we have to be careful that we don't so demean the Iranians and so be dismissive of them and think that they're so powerless that we ignore those things and we think, yeah, whatever, that's just them saying whatever they want. And then we violate our own laws and take actions that have very little chance of any kind of positive outcome and a great risk of something going really bad. That is not something we should be doing. It does not help America. It does not America first. It does not take care of American interest. It actually harms our interest in any number of ways, and it could go catastrophically wrong. I pray it doesn't, but I pray also that sanity prevails and that these negotiations end up in just negotiations and talk, and it doesn't result in any bombing. And then in that case, we can avoid any of the worst outcomes. I certainly hope that's the way it works out. But we're going to stay on top of this like we always do for you because we are unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you the truth, no matter what it is. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.